Nothing is more important than what you're thinking about right now. This is a powerful statement. This is a powerful quote, actually, from a gentleman named Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman was he was an experimental psychologist. He had devised this theory with another guy named Amos Tversky, called the prospect theory. And it's crazy because they actually won a Nobel Prize. And you'd say, okay, that's reasonable, like experimental psychology, that's pretty important. The crazy part about it is that there is no Nobel Prize for psychology. Like, psychology is not a department or not a field of study that you can attain a Nobel Prize in. What they actually got the Nobel Prize in, the area of study is economics. Right? That's how intertwined economics and psychology are, because really economics is like, from my layman's view perspective of the world, economics is the representation of human action, as seen in dollars exchanged, essentially, and business decisions, and that you incorporate risk, your decisions in risk, and I think that has a lot to do with the theory that they came up with. But it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting idea. They talk a lot about this theory, and they break it down. It's really, really interesting. But the aspect that really caught me, and it's not necessarily, this isn't necessarily derived from the prospect theory, but I really love this quote from him, is that, nothing is more important than what you're thinking about right now. And it's so true, because it's like, that is existence right now. That is like your full reality is your thought right now. You think about expressions, you think about, things that we've been saying that we kind of take for granted the meaning of. And when you think about the idea of, how you spend your time, right? It's a very interesting concept, right? When you think about like awareness and attention and focus and wherever your attention is right now, if nothing else is a testament to the fact that this is the reality, documentaries like the Social Dilemma or something like that, the big one that was out there somewhat recently, it's still out there on Netflix. Very, very good. It breaks down how everyone is vying for your attention, and your attention right now is extremely valuable. It's extremely valuable now, more monetarily than it probably ever has been, because of our ability to grab people's attention while not being anywhere close to them, like from your pocket. Boom, there's a notification. We're going to give it the special tone. We're going to bring these colors up. We're going to design, even the games are going to bring you in and suck you in a way that is done through psychology, right? And it's all with the idea, like, how do we keep this person engaged? How do we keep this person on the screen? Okay, we lost them from the screen. How do we get them back, right? And then you think about what you're doing right now, and it's where your attention is, right? You're doing what you're paying attention to. There are very few times that this isn't the case. And they actually get into this. I'll get more into kind of Daniel Kahneman and his System 1, System 2 thinking. If you guys aren't familiar, he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I think it was like Thinking, Fast and Slow. And I have a funny story about how I initially came into contact with that book, like when it came out. But I digress. We'll get more into that later on. Now, you may be a little bit kind of like thrown about right now, because you see the cover of the show is like this sitting image of me, like facing the dark, and progressively like sitting and facing into the dark, and then progressively like transitioning to standing and facing into the light. And so you might be wondering, like, okay, so we're talking about economics, we're talking about psychology, we're talking about this Israeli experimental psychologist, we're talking about all with the cover of this transition of dark to light and false starts and failing up and getting it wrong. How do all of these like obscure ideas interlock? You know, what is going on here? And it all goes back to attention, right? It's all about focus and how we're focusing, what we're focusing on. You know, the whole point, to really just give you my idea of why I created the cover art for this episode the way that I did, is because I wanted to show the focus on the dark, and I wanted to not look at or discuss or represent the focus of the dark and on the dark in any manner, you know, other than the reality. And it's harsh, you know, sitting, looking down, like not being, you can kind of tell by the body language, is like not uplifting, right? It's not motivational. It's not amazing. There's not positive feelings or connotations, you know, seen in that part of the image. You know, like I said, I wanted to avoid the rose-colored glasses of that event, but it's important. It's important. It's not, the idea of it isn't to say that you need to stop looking at the dark and start looking at the light, right? It's the importance of both. It's like there's an importance of looking at the dark. There's an importance of the transition. There's an importance of looking at the light. And the interesting thing is, it's not so much about the transition from the dark to the light. It's the fact that there is a transition. And so you can look at this both ways, right? You can look at this light looking over to the dark, dark looking over to the light. So it's all about your focus and what you're focusing on and what you're focusing on and what that produces, what your focus is producing. And so one of the interesting things to hop on another quote, I actually don't know where this quote initially came from. I know the first time, like I had heard or felt the sentiment prior to this, but I remember the first time that it was like outright said to me, and it was from a leader senior to me while I was in the Army, and I had, so this situation, what he had said was, you can do the right thing or you can do the wrong thing, just don't do nothing, right? And I was like, that action, right? Action is better than inaction. So making a decision and rolling with it, like you can always describe and discuss like what it is that you were thinking and how you came to the conclusion to take the action that you took later. And this was actually all around, there was a dude in our unit that had gotten a DUI, and he had gone to court or whatever, and was going through this process, was actually getting removed from the military for this, and he had kind of become cancer. He was a really smart dude, really good guy, but he kind of become cancerous in the unit, and I was sick of it. I was getting sick of these people that we were kicking out that were, essentially good. Some of them were good guys, some of them were not, essentially good people, but they were drawing down like the morale of the unit because they're there and they're just talking crap about the Army and how awful it is. Like, yeah, man, there's a bunch of awful stuff here for sure. It's the Army, like it's not all great, grand, and glorious. There's absolutely tough parts to it. Like, and we don't need your extra negativity and this hyper focus on just the dark, right? Like dragging us down when we're trying to continue to go out there and train and get better and fulfill our mission, and fulfill our duty. And, but anyway, so one day, we got done with our morning PT, so it was probably, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I get a call to our little office. There's like one phone, because this wasn't like staff work, where I was working at later on in like intelligence, where we're working in offices. There was like one platoon office, so like and it was mainly for the platoon leader, the officer, and the platoon sergeant, the senior NCL. But I'm sitting in there, and I was like BSing with another squad leader. I was a squad leader, and BSing with another squad leader, and this guy, this lady calls, and I answer the phone. I look at my buddy. I'm like, oh, I don't think we're supposed to answer this phone, but there's no one else here, so I'll answer it. So I answer the phone. They were like, oh yeah, we got this guy, and he got a DUI, and we're trying to get him processed or something like that. And I was like, he got a DUI, and like. And she was like, yeah, it's crazy. Like, and I was like, yeah, man, it's like 8 a.m. He was just at PT. Like, why was he drunk? I mean, soldiers being drunk at PT is not necessarily the most strange thing that happens in the military, for sure. So I wasn't like terribly surprised, especially with his disdain for the service. It's not like I expected him to really respect it, but I didn't really expect that from him. Like I said, essentially a good guy. But I got the call from the cops, and they're saying, come pick this guy up. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I can't do that. I need to get a hold of my leadership for them to do that. So I reach out to them, and they're like, oh, you need to send this up. You need to get the 5 Ws. So I actually call back, and I get the 5 Ws from like the police station. I get the 5 Ws, and I report that up to the commander. I give it to the commander, and then I find out that he hadn't been arrested. There wasn't a DUI. It was for his previous DUI, and they just needed him to come in for like a court case, which is crazy because I called and I asked, and that's not what they told me. It's not really relevant though, and so basically, like, I was like, they told me you need to report to the battalion command sergeant major and go get your butt handed to you there. And I had already been on a bad footing with this commander already because he was a jump master. Not to go too deep into the weeds, he wasn't really good at his job, whether it be commanding or jump master or anything. But he was he was a warm body that filled the slot that we needed. So he was there. And I had to go get, my butt reamed. And actually the sergeant major didn't, he asked me, and I explained to him, and he was like, no one was listening. No one was listening to what I was actually saying. Everyone was like, yeah, you were just wrong, and I was like, cool. Like, me reporting the information from the police precinct was wrong. Fair enough. Touche. I don't know what else you want from me. And I said that to all of them. Like, I don't know what you wanted me to do differently. Like, I genuinely, once I got past the point of like frustration, I was like, genuinely, please tell me what I should have done differently. Like, I want to know in that situation what I should have done. They're like, well, you should have just asked more questions. And I was like, I called them back and I asked them for the 5. They're like, oh, you're just arguing. I'm telling you what happened. You're telling me what I should have done. I'm telling you that I feel like I did that. How could I have done that differently? And anyway, all of that is so very far in the past, but it was an interesting experience nonetheless. But when I talked to the section leader above me, he was like, "Hey, listen, man, like there's this principle in the military and in life. You can do the right thing, you can do the wrong thing, or you can do nothing, right? Or just don't do nothing, right?" And so I thought that this was particularly relevant because it's when you think about our focus will dictate kind of action, and can dictate an action in a certain way, and this way, left, right, or top or bottom. But it's all about, it creates or it spurs action. So this actually reminded me, when I was thinking about all of this, it reminded me back to the story that I hadn't told in a while. And so if you're a long-time listener to this show, you'll be very familiar with my side sprayer story. But for those of you who are new, and we have a very large new audience that's been joining us, so let me share this interesting story with you about my kitchen side sprayer, because it is particularly relevant to what we're discussing right now. So this side sprayer, it is it's right. So I didn't even know. just for clarity's sake, I didn't even know what this was called. Like the kitchen sprayer, the little hose with the nozzle, jet spray that you can use to spray off dishes. Apparently, it's called a side sprayer. I didn't know this until actually trying to put this experience down into words one day. And so what had happened was I had moved into this really kind of podunk apartment post-divorce, trying to figure out how to survive on less than half of my income that I had before, and still have a place for the kids to be able to come and everything. So I got this place that was inexpensive, we'll say. Very affordable. And at this place, there was the kitchen was a hot mess. It was disgusting. It was covered in grease. I had to go in and just scrub the entire thing top to bottom, and it was a good time. It was a good time. I enjoyed it. but it was so I'm going through, typical day-to-day stuff, going to work, coming home, eating, doing dishes, all the monotony that we all do. And when I was doing my dishes, I would notice that I couldn't pull the side sprayer out more than like 8 inches, and so it got to the point where I was like, I just didn't use it because it couldn't be pulled out far enough to actually be worth the use, right? It just wasn't a functional tool, and I gave this, the reason for this being like, this isn't a great place, so I'm not really expecting anything great. Anything that comes up that's not very good, not very quality. The carpets are raggedy, the linoleum is worn out and torn up, and I just kind of give this to the fact that it's a cheap place, and whatever, it is what it is. And it was only like 6 months later when I realized, when I went and I pulled it up, and it came out like 2.5 feet, and I was like, whoa! Like, it's just muscle memory. I don't even know why I went to grab it, but I grabbed it and it just pulled right out, and I was like, what in the world? And then I went to use it again, like all excited, like, cool, I can like use this thing now. I don't really understand, but whatever. And so I went to grab it, and it was pulled up, but like this I dealt with this problem. Like, it was like I dealt with this problem for like way too long, like 6 to 8 months in this apartment before I opened up the cabinet door underneath, and I actually looked to see what was going on underneath there, and all that was happening was that the nozzle, or the lever that allows either the hot or the cold water to come into the sink, one of the sides, the hose for the side sprayer was actually wrapped around there. So all it took was me like repositioning it there. I mean, it was set up in a way where like whenever you put it back down, it was likely to kind of get wrapped around it again. And I never really got a solution. I just knew that I needed to kind of give it pull it out a couple inches and give it a little wiggle at that point, and it would come off of that little lever and be good to go. But it was an instance of me allowing a pebble to become a boulder, right? It was the reason that I bring this story up is because this non-issue, when not addressed, when not taking action towards it and not giving it any sort of due diligence and just accepting it for what it is, I allowed it to become this unnecessary. I wouldn't call it a boulder. It's not like not having a side sprayer is a boulder, but I allowed it to become a rock. If we're going to stick with the analogy, I allowed it to become something more significant and impact my flow, my process, my operation, my life more than was required. All just because I did nothing. Right? I went to use it, it didn't work, and I did nothing. I was like, all right. And it was the reason that this comes up, and the reason I bring it up on the show over and over again is because it's a reminder for everyone that to take a look at your life and to try to look at things. It's so hard. It's so hard to identify those things, because it's not like I was every day actively thinking like, I can't use this thing because it's messed up. It's like I've already accepted it. It's like accepting the wall is there. Like, yeah, I can knock the wall down, but like there's a wall there, so I'm gonna go through the door instead of knocking on the wall. But it's hard to challenge things that we accept as walls when they're not necessarily walls, right? And so like I said, I bring it up as a way to help us to try to like challenge the things that we're accepting, for you to use that as an opportunity and motivation and an example that you can look at those things in your life. Like, what am I accepting as status quo, as part of the framework that isn't necessarily have to be part of the framework, and so that's the reason why I think that's relevant, and I think that it feeds in well from that quote from my leader who said, you know, you can do the right thing, you can do the wrong thing, or you just don't do nothing. You know, I did nothing in that example, and it led to no good things happening, right? And then once I identified and actually did something, then it created a pathway forward, a way for me to actually use my side sprayer. So that's the side sprayer story. And so the reason that side sprayer story came up in my mind, and that quote came up in my mind in conjunction with it, was actually because I had a somewhat like a better version, like the side sprayer story, but like done better this time. So this time there's been like, my stepdaughter Ariana's got the playroom downstairs, and her playroom has got like all of her art stuff and paint and a bunch of like little beads and stuff. All these beads and everything like ended up all over the floor. And we left for vacation last week, and you know, she was in the process of cleaning up, but basically like there was a big pile of like glittery, beady trash on the floor that needed to be cleaned up. And instead of every day I'd go down in the lead up to the vacation, I'd go down and I'd see it. I'd be like, I gotta tell her, hey, we gotta clean this up. We gotta clean this up. And in my head, I'm like, I need to have her do it because it's her stuff and it's her responsibility and it's part of it. And so every day I'm like kind of trying to avoid going around it, but it's beads and it's glitter, and so it's like all over the place. So I'm like, every day I'm going into the gym, I'm like stepping in it, and I'm stepping like glitter onto like the mats, and then you could see it like just tracked around now. And I got to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, I just need to do it. I just like, I'm never gonna remember to remind her to do it in time and at an appropriate time, and I only think about it when she's like at school and I'm here trying to get a workout in while I'm working and whatever. But so I took these 1% steps, these 1% moves to addressing the issue, where it's like, okay, well, I got to get the vacuum cleaner. Well, where the crap's the vacuum? Oh, okay, I found it. And then I get the vacuum cleaner and I bring it down. Then I bring it down and I plug it in and I plug it in and then I vacuum everything up. So you think, when hearing this, that this is like, I did that, like, in one fell swoop. However, all of what I just explained, I'm using air quotes right now for those of you on the podcast. All of the events that I just discussed, bringing a vacuum down and vacuuming up the mess, took about 2.5 weeks to do. The vacuum eventually made its way down, and then it sat there, and it eventually got plugged in, and then it sat there, and then eventually later everything got vacuumed. But I will say that this is a tangible improvement from the side sprayer story. It was not 6 months, it was several weeks, and in those several weeks it was, I won't say steady progression, but there was progression. There was things happening, right? Like we were making moves. The vacuum found its way downstairs, the plug found its way into the wall, and the vacuum eventually got turned on and used. So I think that's pretty cool. But to the sentiment of this episode, you know, I want you to notice the error, right? You know, I really like this idea, and I don't remember where I heard this. It might have been Tim Ferriss who might have said it, but I don't remember where it initially came from. But it was something to the effect of, you know, if it takes less than 2 minutes to do, if it's something that's on your radar and it takes less than 2 minutes to do, just do it now. Like, stop thinking about it, stop planning it, stop letting it fester in the back of your mind as something that you want to get to. Just do it now. Maybe I failed at that a little bit. It's, you know, I acknowledge. But from this, basically, I had like, okay, here's kind of the idea that I'm having that came together for the show, is that we have an idea, right? And in order to have to see an idea, to see this alternate future, in this case, to see a clean floor and the pathway to the gym, in order to see this idea come to fruition, we come up with courses of action, right? And then in our courses of action, we want to develop incremental improvements, right? I love James Clear in his book Atomic Habits. James Clear actually has an excellent newsletter that he puts out. And he's active on Twitter and things like that. And that's the thing, is like, Twitter is such a hot bed of mess and just disgustingness. And so I really do my best to only have people on there that that I find like motivational. So the people I follow on there are like Tim Ferriss, you know, freaking James Clear, Malcolm Gladwell, you know, thinkers, Jordan Peterson, people that I actually want to see the stuff from, that helps to bring in kind of positivity and thought-provoking ideas. And what's his name? The Y guy, Simon Sinek. Yeah, Simon Sinek. Like, these are the type of people that I follow on Twitter, and so I see James Clear stuff on there, and it's just it's phenomenal. It's simple. It's easy. You know, it's really good. But anyway, so that's kind of like the basis for everything. The basis for a goal, the basis for movement is we have an idea, we develop a course of action, and then we have incremental improvement. This is like with Simon Sinek has like the golden circle. I don't even know if that's technically his golden circle. I don't remember. I just listened to his book like a month ago. But but it's, you have the why in the middle, surrounded by the how, surrounded by the what, right? Which is like the opposite of the way that most businesses do it. You can watch his TED Talk, he breaks it all down. But it's basically that idea. It's like you have your idea, that's the why, like why I'm doing something. Then you have your course of action, that's the how. What's the mechanism, right? And then the incremental improvement, like the what. Like what am I doing to actually see this come to fruition? So I wanted to put some actual meat under these theoretical bones, because that's kind of where a lot of this gets lost in translation. A lot of this, you know, incremental improvement, mechanisms, and purpose, kind of like, okay, that sounds good, but it's like, how, I can't touch it, I can't feel it. And so I wanted to give you the background and to this podcast and use that as kind of like an example of this and relevant to the topic of the show this week. And I actually I put this call out in my newsletter. I put it out yesterday, and I'm sorry for all you guys that received the newsletter. I told you that this was going to be put out yesterday. I gave you links to the YouTube video and everything, or to my YouTube channel, and I didn't get this out there. So I apologize that it wasn't out there on time, like I said. But it's coming to you today, so one day late, not too shabby. So basically, in my newsletter, it was entitled "You're Wrong, Thank God." so it might come off as a little bit harsh, but the thing is, like, we all, it's important to acknowledge that when you do something new, you're almost guaranteed to get it wrong. And it's an important thing, you know. And so when I reflect back on this, like I said, I want to reflect back on kind of the origins of this show, because when I think back, when I initially started, when I initially had the idea for this podcast, well, I've been doing this podcast for almost 2 years, and so it had to be like 4 years ago when I had the idea. I'm like, I want to do a podcast. But the original plan, for those that are new and not familiar, the original plan was to actually do a political show, and I wanted to not just do your typical political talk show. You know, I wanted to niche down, and so I needed to find like my variant, and it wasn't Republican or Democrat. It was more libertarian. It was more general, and it wasn't even libertarian like capital L Libertarian Party. It was, and for those who don't obla, don't worry about it. It's not really relevant. But I wanted to get more specific. I wanted to keep niching down, and so I'm like, okay, well, there are a lot of libertarian podcasts out there as well, and they all kind of find themselves talking about the same things, and like, why be another voice echoing the same ideas? I want to have a better, more niche down take on something. And so like, well, let me localize, you know, I'm going to do this for, okay, well, if I wanted to localize, where could I do it for? I had to spend a lot of time kind of contemplating that and how I wanted to, because I had been militarily nomadic for probably a decade at that point. And so while I had spent 17 straight years in Omaha, raised born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. Moved and lived in Arizona for a year and a half, 2 years. Moved back to Omaha for another 2-3 years. Joined the military, and then have been on the East Coast from North Carolina to Virginia to Georgia, back now to Virginia, on the East Coast for now 12 years, coming up very soon. And so that was I was like, well, if I wanted to localize, how do I localize? Like, I'm not Georgian, I'm not like the country, the real Georgians, but I'm not like from the state of Georgia, which is where I was at when I was having the real clear idea that I wanted to do a show. And so I felt weird doing it, but I also felt weird going back to Omaha and looking at their politics and diving in, because I hadn't been there and I hadn't lived there in so long. I'm like, but you know what? Like, I am, like, my state of residence is still Nebraska. All my family's still in Nebraska. Omaha's a really big deal. It's a big hub for us. And so, well, yeah, I'll just, you know what? I'm going to do that. So I'm going to niche down. I'm going to niche down to Omaha. And I really dove in, too. Like, I went into, like, Google. I created, like, the Google Alerts. So I'm getting, like, constant feeds of, like, different political feeds of Omaha proper and all the other, and, like, the subsidiaries, the different kind of smaller cities around it, Bellevue and, Ralston and all these kind of cities that surround Omaha, to kind of get a feel of the politics, get the feeds in, and really start to understand it. I was reading, like the state laws and the Constitution and the priorities in the city, and like doing research on the individual politicians, and starting to look like creating, like, in the military we do link diagrams for like terrorist cells. Not saying that the Nebraskan politicians are terrorists, it's just that was like my background was intel. And so I'm like, well, let me take this concept and let me put it here. Like, so I went through and I created a whole link diagram for Nebraska's and more specifically Omaha's politicians, and started to like create the correlations and figure out who does what and who knows who. And I was really diving deep. Like, I even went, and so I was like, well, I want to make sure that it's not just that, right? I really want to niche down there too, but I wanted to have this be like at least a 3-day a week, if not a 5-day-a-week show. And like, well, how much news is really coming in from Nebraska, from Omaha, to be able to produce that kind of stuff? I'm like, well, let me add in some other stuff. So I wanted to put in like this, a positive. Politics can get so negative and focus like, this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad. So I wanted to put a positive take in there. Like, okay, what are some uplifting stories? So, okay, let's do an episode about uplifting stuff. Or, history is a really big deal to me, and it's really important for us to learn from history. I'm going to do a day in history, at least a segment in every show, if not like 1 day a week. All of this was kind of taking form. All these ideas were coming in, and so it was really taking shape. And I created the websites and the Facebook pages and the groups, and the name of it was going to be Liberty Tree. I like just recently deleted, I think. I couldn't find it when I went to look for it now. I think that I just recently deleted within the last couple of months that Facebook page. I was talking with artists, even Tony Sims. I had posted a picture of me rocking his gear, a t-shirt that I bought from him that has a studio on it. It's the middle of nowhere studio, and he does amazing work, incredible airbrushing, incredible artistic work. I've always seen, when I got to know him, we were working together at Volkswagen before I joined the Army, I had seen like comics that he drew out and these characters and stuff, and it's just incredible detail. And the work that he does, that, like, I've seen him do stuff on like motorcycle helmets, on motorcycles, on hoods of cars, and it's everywhere. Like, he can do anything. He built these like were they lighthouses all around the city that got picked up for like this big artist project all around the city that he's right next to. But it's in Iowa, so it's very aptly named, like the middle of nowhere studio. But I was talking to him about like, ideas for like the backdrop, and having the idea was like, I wanted imagery. I wanted like a picture that was telling the story of each amendment to the Constitution, to the United States Constitution. So the Bill of Rights. So I wanted that, and I was like, okay, well, I was thinking about doing one big picture and putting that all together, or doing like singular ones, like this picture is a story that represents the First Amendment. This is a picture that represents the Second Amendment. And I had talked to him, about that, and all, like I just said, all of these things, I put in a ton of work. This is the better part of a year, if not a year and a half, like probably half a year, like just thinking about it, ruminating, kind of passively learning from like listening to other podcasts about how podcasts work, kind of instead of just looking at podcasts as like a consumer, I started listening and paying attention to them as somebody interested in actually producing my own. And then that transitioned to, I want to do the research. So that was probably like another 8-9 months of like intensive research. Like I'm getting out of work and I'm immediately diving into my computer and just doing the work to figure out what was going on. All of that so I could take that idea, crumple it up in a ball and throw it away in the waste bin. Like all of that. It's like a year and a half's worth of work, if not 2 years worth of like thinking and work and projecting, all just to completely throw it away. And why? Is the natural question that you have to ask if you don't already know. And I mean, that question is really, the why question is what led me to the ditching of the idea itself. In 2016, there was a lot of like really big energy off of the very intense national campaign for the presidency. And, I'd been pretty politically interested since around 2008. That's kind of when I could track my own interest in politics back to. I remember I hadn't joined the Army yet. I had been drafted for working at a polling station. And I use that word carefully because it is exactly what the letter came. The letter I got in the mail was like, hey, you have been drafted. I was like, oh my God, what? I've been drafted? I didn't know we were at a war. I mean, I knew we were at a war, but it was 2008. I didn't really see a draft. No one was talking about it. And but yeah, around that time, and I had to go work the electric pole down the street from my house, and that was actually a really cool, enlightening experience. But yeah, so I had been interested in politics, and I'd been following it very much in the right wing conservative bent of things. It's kind of the family I grew up in. And that was when I was listening to people on the radio initially in that podcast, it was all kind of leaned, the people that interested me, the ideas that resonated with me, all kind of leaned a little bit that way. And I still absolutely lean, it really depends. I lean, like, I'm really conservative on some things, and I'm really, really liberal on other things. Like, I definitely believe that I should be able to have a machine gun to protect my pot field in the backyard and your gay rights. You know what I mean? Like, I'm all about rights. I'm all about not messing with other people. That's really what it comes down to. And that's why libertarianism ended up like resonating so much with me, even more than republicanism. It was just because of that exact kind of thought process. And so, but why do a podcast about this idea? Just because I think that it's interesting. I think that football is really interesting, and basketball. I love playing frisbee. Archery is a ton of fun, and those are all interesting. So I wanted, and reflecting and thinking about stuff, I needed to dig deeper, right? I was like, well, I want to impact people, and politics deals with the world that we live in, right? And the rules that we decide are important to govern ourselves and our society. It's like sports, because you're watching two teams fight and go back and forth, even if the other ones want to come up and play. It's like, that's cute. It's like watching the Cleveland Browns for the majority of their existence be like, yeah, we're a football team too. Like, okay, Libertarian Party, that's adorable. You guys are cute. Green Party, Constitutional Party, all that freaking, yeah, sure, your parties. That's adorable. There's two teams. Let's be real. So, but in this case, with politics, it's a little bit more interesting, because when the Super Bowl's over, there's real consequences. Or, I mean, that's what I told myself, and that's what all of the commentary that I listened to told me. Is like, this is every election. This is the most important election in the world. Like, no, I get it. Like, everyone wants to say that. They say this every election cycle. Like, I know everyone wants to say this every election cycle, but this one really is. And it's the same one for the next one, and it's the same one for the one after that. And you know what? In reality, very little changes from president to president, or even party to party. But why? Why is that the case? You know, and when change does happen politically, why does it feel like it didn't actually like emanate from within politics, but like more like an injection from the outside? Almost every time, it never feels like that was a pure political move. When it does, you're like, oh, that's crazy. Like that actually happened. Like Obamacare. That's a great example. Like, wow, you actually did something. Like, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying you did it. You actually did something. That's crazy. Very interesting. But these were the questions that I battled with, right? You know, and the answer was actually closer to home and much more personal than any of that. It was, you know, I had to keep asking questions, and I knew that it was more than just an interest. It was because, and it was more than just that there's impacts, but I wanted to talk about it because I really wanted to make a difference. I really wanted to help people. I didn't want to like change the world. I wanted to help people. And that was kind of the part where I needed to dig deeper, so I could get to figure that out. It wasn't that I wanted to make a difference, because that's what I thought. I was like, well, I want to make a difference. Like, well, how? Like, well, I want to make a difference by helping people. And my idea was like helping them, provide them a new way of thinking, a new way of contemplating about politics. But really, it wasn't about politics. Politics was a mechanism. It was like, if I provide another way outside of the standard status quo two parties, then, you know, maybe that will increase your quality of life. Maybe that'll make things more interesting. Maybe that'll shake up the system. And really, it was, like I said, it was a mechanism. It was a how. It wasn't the why. The why was I wanted to improve people's quality of life, right? It's about how did I want to do that? Well, one of the biggest things that I thought was important, and I still believe is supremely important entering anything, entering any type of endeavor, is personal responsibility. Right, very cliche, like, oh, here we go, Republican, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So I wanted to dig deeper. I didn't want to just leave it there. I wanted to, like, for me, it's more along the lines of like emotional responsibility, emotional resilience. You know, increase resilience to take better actions, to recover faster, improve relationships. You know, with both other people, obviously, like professional, personal, interpersonal, but also with yourself. Improve that relationship like never before. All starting within, and then letting that emanate outwards from there. You know, and so to the premise, right, of this episode, all about getting it wrong, false starts, and failing up, right? No, the failing up here was, while I had to spend a little bit of time, right? A lot of time investing into the first idea for the podcast, I had actually changed my mental operational environment. You know, I created a space for this podcast. The podcast was merely a how, right? And that's what I figured out. Like, the podcast was a how to my why. And in this case, it wasn't even the how that needed the adjustment. The podcast is still a viable means of how, a mechanism, a delivery system for ideas. You know, I needed to adjust the what, right? So that's what I needed to focus on for here. And so while Liberty Tree, you know, the original idea, was crumpled up and thrown out, the podcast remained the desired or desirable to me mechanism to begin implementing my why. And this is why the newsletter that I put out yesterday was titled "You're Wrong, Thank God." So, and because thank God I was wrong. I can't even imagine the type of stress, unnecessary stress I would have taken by taking this sport-like interest of a hobby in politics that's so downstream from where my real why is, and wanting to improve people's lives, and taking that head on, making it a part of my identity, and then fighting people every day over it in a way that, like, like when you I don't know about you guys. I'll get into fights, I'll get into arguments, and I'll argue. I'll end up arguing a point that I don't even necessarily totally agree with, just because I kind of started out on that side, and I really like I need to argue to like stand up to make sure that I don't like be shown as changing my mind. I've gotten way better about this over the years, and I've gotten way better about this because I didn't go into the political game, right? Like in the political game, it is like suicide to be like, oh well, like I guess that's a good point too. Like maybe the thought that I was having over here isn't that great, because people need to categorize. They need to put you in a box, and if you're wishy-washy and you're moving from boxes to boxes, then it's really hard for people to track, like, I don't know where you're at, and it's rare that you have somebody that can step out and do that and be able to go back. You have to like set yourself out as that person, and I wasn't ready to do it then, and I have honestly no interest in doing it. It didn't serve my why. Like the only person I know that's really done that in any effective and meaningful way is Joe Rogan, and that's something that's very unique and special. But I couldn't. Here's the thing. It's really fascinating because I couldn't have been wrong if I was sitting around on my ass at home, going to work, being a good soldier, coming home, studying and prepping all this stuff for my professional military career. I couldn't have been wrong. Like I gotten good at soldiering, and I could have gotten way better. And I did, I kept progressing, kept doing it and pushing until the point where, we veered paths. But, like, if I didn't try to start doing something at home, if I didn't try to start doing something new and pushing myself, I would have never failed. I could have never have failed. I would have never, because you can't fail when you're not trying something new. I mean, you can, but if you've been doing something for long enough, you got to figure out the ways. You figure out the ways not to fail. And it's not to say that you've found the ways to win, but you found the ways to avoid failing, to avoid the tough situations, to avoid the things that you don't like to do. And that would be failing. Oh, I got, coerced into leading this meeting, and I don't like leading meetings. Like, oh, I failed. You're like, well, I found a really good way to avoid doing that by sucking at leading a meeting, and stuff like that. So we all find the ways not to fail at those tasks in the sphere of the world that we live in every day. So it's like, where are you pushing yourself outside of that into uncomfortable areas where it is likely that you're going to fail? I mean, the crazy part is that when you do this, when you push yourself out, you should know. And I'm not saying like I'm telling you now so that you should know. Like, you should intrinsically know that you're going to fail. Like, look back historically at anybody that's done anything amazing. Even anything like, and those, when we look at history, those are the people you're going to find, because those are the people that make up the pages of history. You look at Thomas Edison, 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. 10,000 or 1,000, whatever it was, a ton. But the bottom line is that he messed up and he failed over and over and over again. Albert Einstein, old Al, fell flat on his face. Terrible, terrible first. I forget the details, but messed up super bad in his pathway to eventually come up with the theory of relativity. Like incredible failures. These people failed so much. These people that make up our books, they failed so much that you would think that like the only thing that they're good at doing, the only thing they could do consistently is fail. And then until they don't, right? Until you get to that point, the seesaw tips the other way, right? Because you just keep loading up the weight. Like, okay, I'm throwing a pebble on that side. It's still nothing. Throwing a pebble on that side. Still nothing. Throw it. It's just like James Clear's use of the ice cube. I love that metaphor, where you're in a room and like you have to like work out, and like your body heat is the thing that's like increasing the temperature of the room, and it's at like 0 degrees, and there's an ice cube there, and you need to melt the ice cube, and you're working and building up the temperature, but it doesn't matter. All of those degrees independently don't matter until you get to that point above freezing. So all of this work looks like it's not doing anything until you get to that point. Like, oh hey, and that's why we see people like, oh, it's like they're an overnight success. I can't believe it. Like, yeah, you didn't see the last 7 years of the overnight. Like, yeah, if 7 years can be amalgamated into an overnight, and you call that a success? Cool, yeah, I'm an overnight success. That's a Mark Cubanism, actually. I love that. But that's not even... So the question isn't even like, am I going to fail? Can I do it? It's not, can I do this? It's not even like the better version of it. I'm like, okay, well, how can I do this? Like, that's just great. That's a great step up in the right direction. It's still not the question. It's not even like the best version of that question, which is like, should I do this? I mean, honestly, like, if you ask that, that's not bad, man. That's not bad. That's tapping on that why. But there's more. There's depth to it. There's grit to it. It's, the golden version of that question of that last derivation of the why is, what is the cost of my existence, of my soul? What's the cost of my very being? And how can I pay it? How fast can I pay that? The thing is, you're going to fail, like I said, but you shouldn't think so. You shouldn't think that you're going to fail, right? It's like, I know, it's like, you're like, what? You're telling me over and over again I'm going to fail. I know I'm going to fail, but it's like, yeah, right now in this theoretical world that we're discussing, like, yeah, you're going to fail. You can accept the fact that you're going to fail, but when you have that idea, it's important for you to really not think that you're going to fail. After I did 25 interviews with entrepreneurs, business owners, artists, leaders, one of the key things that I found over and over again, this one of the themes that I found was, they're like, I'm so happy I did this when I was like too dumb to know otherwise, because if I would have known how hard it was going to be and how hard I was going to fail over and over again in this endeavor, I probably wouldn't have done it, and it's that idea, and it goes back to, where I started the show off with our good friend Dr. Daniel Kahneman, the Israeli experimental psychologist. He broke down the mind into two systems, and he admits, he says outright, like, it's not actually two systems. Like, you can't go in there and say, like, oh, I found system 1. No, I found system 2. So look him up and watch the videos for, like, the full in-depth breakdown of this theory, of this idea. He was even kind enough to have written a book. It's probably on audio as well. That's, like I said, it's Thinking Fast and Slow. And I did tell you, so I mentioned the book, and I did mention that there was a crazy, interesting side story of how I actually found my way to this book. So it was he wrote the book in October of 2011. It couldn't have been much far after that. I think this was 2011, if not 2012. I went out to training at this complex in California for a month, and it was pretty intense training out in the mountainous desert, helping to train Third ID for a deployment they had, and we were there on their backside in air defense. I was a Stinger missile guy rolling around in Bradleys and in our Avenger trucks. I didn't have an Avenger because I was on a Stinger team. Anyway, I digress. So we get done with the training, and we're exhausted, right? We're getting ready to head back, and we go to the USO, and we're sitting down. And I remember I walked into the USO, and I grabbed, they got like sandwiches and stuff there. I grabbed like this peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and probably like a chocolate milk, because I am a little kid. And this is like, I'd only been in the Army for a handful of years. I'd made sergeant by this time, so I was in a leadership position. I was rolling my own team out there. Me and Cam Mays, baby. Love you, brother. But yeah, so I go in there, and I grab my plate, and I grab my drink, and I look, and they always have, like, now, some of them have, like, a little library section, so I go and I grab I'm looking at the bookshelf, and I see this book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman. I was like, that's interesting. Like, even back then, but way, 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 way before I had any idea about podcasts or freaking anything. I was just trying to soldier at that point. But I saw it, and I'd always been interested in the mind, and I was like, well, that's it. That's interesting. I'll grab it. And so I remember I grabbed it, and I sat down, and I was like eating my sandwich and drinking my milk, and I made it through like 2.5 pages, probably of like the prologue, and I like passed out. The next thing I know, like the bells are going off, everyone's running through, like, hey, we gotta go, the buses are here. So I'm like getting up, running, grab my stuff. We run out to the bus, we get there, get to the bus, get to the plane, fly home, get home, And when I get home and I'm unpacking my bag, I pull out the book. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I just stole this book from the USO. I'm sorry, USO, much love, but I appreciate you for not getting butthurt over it. So, but yeah, it's so interesting because I have been on like a Daniel Kahneman kick lately, and I remember I don't remember where I heard it initially, but it was like, it might have been on Rogan or somewhere else where I heard like the System 2, System 1 thought process, and I remember the thing that stuck out to me. And I remember I was actually telling Yasmin this like months ago. I was like, God, there's this guy who had this idea. It was all about, the thing that stuck out to me in my memory was there was a guy that was talking about this concept of memory and how when the way that we experience our lives, the way we experience the world around us, and he was talking about like, they did an experiment with people that were getting oh my gosh, the thing where they check your butt. I'm totally freaking forgetting right now. But so they're doing this colonoscopy. So these people are getting colonoscopies, and they're doing like these pain checks and stuff like that. And people that had pain just in the beginning versus steady pain throughout the entire experience at the same level, say it's like a level 3 pain, but somebody only had the level 3 pain at the beginning and somebody had level 3 pain throughout. The person who had level 3 pain throughout would say that he had a better experience overall than the person who had level 3 pain just in the beginning, even though that person had less pain overall for a significant, like 75% less time than the other person, because it's our minds track things by change, they track things by events. And so it's the same idea. You know, he talked about listening to an amazing symphony, being out at an orchestra and listening to this composition, just amazing, life-changing, and then somebody's phone rings at the end, or there's some screeching sound at the end, and you're like, oh, and it just ruined the entire thing for me. I'm like, no, it didn't. The whole thing was amazing, and then there was one little hiccup at the end, but like that change, that shift to that negative has changed everything in your memory and your remembering self. And so then it's the same thing for like while you're on vacation. It's all about the big changing events. So if you have an amazing vacation, beginning, middle, all the way up to the end, and then right at the end you have this terrible, awful experience, like the whole, your remembering self is going to skew that entire vacation to have that like, yeah, it was good. You might even say, yeah, it was a good vacation, but this one thing, like, okay, well, you didn't list out the 50 amazing things that happened versus that one that happened at the end, but because there was a big shift, and the big shift was at the end, and it was bad, then, well, you know, the whole thing was okay, I guess. It was a pretty good vacation, but, you know, but it had this thing. And so the thing I'm going to emphasize in you and telling it from my remembering self is that it was okay, but this. And so that's kind of like the idea. That's, you know, these are the ideas coming from Kahneman. And it's like System 1, to break that down, and the reason why I'm talking about this is why I bring it up. It's this is System 1 and System 2 thinking. So System 1 is essentially like your instincts. You think back to like when I was talking about driving the car. So like when you can, the fact that you can zone out while driving a car, like brings driving a car into System 1 thinking, because it's like it's instinctual, right? It's also more base instincts than that, but he makes that point with a car because it shows that you can actually train System 1 instincts. Where a lot of people would think that those kind of basic instincts, like, oh, you just have them. Like, well, yeah, you do, and this. And System 2 is the more complex stuff. Like, he gives an example of math problems. Like, what's 42 times 78? You know, you have to break this down using sub-steps, and you have to remember the information from step to step, and then you have to combine those together using rules, and you have to remember the rules and when to use them in order to get the correct answer. It's more easily defined, I guess, by saying it's effortful thinking. It's effortful problem solving. Right? So I said that this was trying to tie it back into the show, trying to back in, not just giving you random facts and fun, interesting things about Daniel Kahneman and System 1 and System 2 thinking. You know, we go back to the question, what is the cost of my very being? What I'm saying is that you need to figure out what's worth your complete and utter embarrassment, right? Like, what is worth going up to my boss and standing up, not backing down, and getting fired over? What's worth getting fired from my spouse over, aka divorce? You know, what is the overly used cliche? What is the hill worth dying on? You don't want to go charging up a hill and go, yeah, I don't really know. I mean, this hill's okay, I guess. It's, it's a decent hill, but, like, I'm dead. Like, what's the one that's worth dying on? What's the idea, the concept, the principle worth being fired for? Worth being fired from your marriage for? What's the idea that's? And I'm not saying to seek out ideas that your wife or your husband's gonna divorce you over. I'm saying what's worth it. What's it the thing that, like, if I pursue this and the person that I love dearest, like, wants to not be with me because I'm pursuing this, then I have to let them go, because this matters so much to me that I cannot, like, the fact that you cannot abide by this, so you can't even tolerate it, means that we should not be together and that we made a mistake at some point. There was a lack of communication about the things that mattered to me, and perhaps that was my fault. Almost guaranteed that was my fault. But what is that? And what's that cost? And how can I pay it? This requires the proper emotional context, System 1. And we use System 2 to justify these emotional decisions. Instead, no, in the emotional context of System 1, it's not just emotion. System 1 isn't emotions. It's not emotional. It's just, I think, my interpretation, and this is purely layman, that those are tied. Those are tied together. And so if you've been following this show for any period of time now, this is the theme that I always harp on. Our emotions are a feature of our being. They're not a bug. It's not something we have to overcome. It's something we have to acknowledge. We don't work in spite of our emotions. We work with our emotions. And if it's like, to use another overused cliche, let's try swimming upstream. That's trying to live life battling your emotions. No, you need your emotions. You need your emotions to make decisions. Emotions created my why. They formulated my how. And they motivated my what. And they destroyed my what. But not my how. And they could destroy my how, but it's still pushing my why. And because I spent time using System 2 in conjunction with System 1, not competing with each other, to develop a clear, understandable why that is emotionally driven. But this is not so, like I said, the emotions created my why. They formulated my how. They motivated my what. And then they destroyed my what. But not my how. And they spurred movement. They spurred action. Because that's what emotions do. They spur action. It's just really beneficial when you have a why, an emotional why, that's drawing you towards something that your emotions are going to cause action for, that's healthy, right? In an even deeper manner. This drew me. This is not where I decided to go. This was the Liberty Tree. That's not where I decided not to go there. That was not my calling. I did not feel compelled emotionally to share this message with the world. So, what is worth your embarrassment? What is worth you being fired? What's worth you losing your life over? What's worth standing up to the world? Start here. Start here. Now, if this episode, meant something to you, if it was worth its time and you actually got some pleasure out of it, like, great. That makes me really, really happy. Really the main thing I ask from you, if that's the case, is just hit the like and subscribe button, right? I'm not even asking you to do anything beyond that if you don't feel called to. Like, all it is, you're 2 clicks away, just a like and a subscribe. You're 2 clicks away from making a huge difference in this show, in this production, and in our movement forward. That's a really big deal. I'm not going to go to the details of why that's such a big deal, but it helps our growth, and our growth is a huge part of our purpose. If I'm not helping people, then I'm not fulfilling my why, right? That was the point. And so subscribing, seeing those numbers come up, it attracts other people. It brings in the community, and it helps us share the message out to everyone else. And that's the next step. Is if this episode did hit you in a particularly meaningful way, then find that one person. Now, I've said in the past, find 3 people, 2 people that you think that were ready to listen to it, and another person who might need to hear it but doesn't know they need to hear it. I've used that idea. Find one person. Just find one person to share this link with. One person that you think, like, you know what, like, they'll get it. They'll understand. Like, just share it to that one person. If you do those 3 things, we're gonna have an amazing movement, and it's going to be thanks to you. I can come here every day, and I can talk, and I can give you these ideas, and I can help lay out different roadmaps and different strategies and techniques and ideas that I think are beneficial to you guys. But if we don't get the word out there, I can have the best mousetrap, but if we're not talking to people about it, what are we doing? Like, we're not doing our due diligence in getting and helping as many people as we can. So help me fulfill my mission just by taking that one step further. If you feel that this episode was actually worth it, if you feel like it was actually worth being shared, please do share it with them. Find that one person and share it with them. Let them know that you thought there's something meaningful in it, and that you think that they need something out of it. And if you're willing to do that, I will be back here again next week for another episode here on the Matt Show. Thank you guys so much, and I look forward to seeing you then.